Okay, a couple of you. Good. What's Romanticism?
It was an idealistic movement. I mean, mostly dealt with like ways of thought. So it dealt with like sentiment towards life in general.
Okay, yeah, that's actually, you are not far off the mark there. What sorts of things do we usually associate with the term Romanticism? What kind of poetry do we often think of it as? Like if I tell you that you're going to be, like, say, reading Thoreau, or you're going to be... Yeah, we tend to think of Romantic poets as nature poets, right? And nature is very important to them as a source of imagery. They tend to use a lot of nature imagery, but the nature stuff is just a means to an end, right? Nature is more a sort of focus for contemplation for a Romantic poet. Nature is meant to spur thought, to generate ideas. And, this is the reason I said, Forrest's definition here wasn't far off. Really what Romantic poetry is about is thinking. What a Romantic poet tries to demonstrate, what he tries to illustrate, is the human mind at work, right? The mind in action. So let's think about this in terms of the stuff we were looking at last time. When we looked at the neoclassical poetry, right? What's that defined by? How do we define neoclassicism? What's that poetry like? What are its primary concerns?
Is it interested in human beings and social creatures?
Yeah, they're interested in human social life. Good.
Harmony and balance.
Harmony and balance. Right, harmony and balance in the line. Harmony and balance in life. All things in moderation. Yeah, neoclassicism is not a poetry of extremes of any kind. They don't like extremes. Extremes make them uncomfortable. What else? What else do you remember about neoclassicism?
Heroic couplets.
Okay, yeah, we have this very regular, rigid, regulated form, right? So I think it's just enough to say that it's really highly formal.
It should reflect the content of the poem. The form should.
Yep, form and content must be closely related. Anything else? I think we've got a pretty good list to work with here anyway, right? So, Romanticism is the artistic movement that comes sort of historically directly after neoclassicism and is in a lot of ways a reaction to it. So, Romanticism, we're talking about the late 18th to early 19th centuries. Now, neoclassical poetry stressed order and balance in the way it did, in part because of the ways in which educated people in that era looked at the world. Right? Are any of you familiar with what a deist is? Do you know what deism is?
Yeah.
What's deism?
God and higher powers.
Yeah, I mean, a deist does believe in a God, right? What does a deist believe God does?
Like the clockmaker or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. God is a divine clockmaker who set up a perfectly ordered, rational universe with predictable rules and laws, and then stepped back from it to let it run itself. Right? That's what a deist believes. So, God created the universe but no longer intervenes in it, doesn't need to because it's already very well ordered, highly rational. right? And this gives way to a philosophy. It's related to a philosophical belief called rationalism, right? Every effect has a cause. You can always trace an effect back to its cause. And phenomena in nature are predictable, right? Nature has observable, specific laws that always work the same way, right? This comes along around the same time as the scientific method does. Now, coming up alongside the rationalists are another group of philosophers called empiricists. Now, while the rationalist believes that everything is already perfectly ordered and predictable and orderly and organized, an empiricist believes that the only means we have of actually getting information, the only means we have of learning anything, is through our senses. And our senses are limited and imperfect. So we have only these limited, imperfect instruments in order to try to comprehend, to take in the world around us and make sense out of it. So if the only things we can know are the things that we learn through our senses, can we actually know anything, according to an empiricist? What do you think? Yeah, you can't know anything for sure. There's no certainty for an empiricist. Cause and effect, an extreme empiricist would argue, is purely an illusion. Right? It's just we notice that one thing happens and then something else happens. We have no basis for believing that the two events are necessarily connected, right? So, say I hit a billiard ball, it hits another ball, and it goes off at a particular angle. Can I predict with absolute certainty that every time I hit the ball the same way, it's going to do the same thing? Yeah, a rationalist would say yes, right? Because laws of mathematics and all that shit. An empiricist would say no. The only reason you think it's always going to do that is because in your experience, it always has. You can never be sure that when you do it again, it's actually going to do the same thing. Why does the sun come up in the east every morning? Because it always has. Right? We have no reason for believing that there is any rational basis to that. So yeah, experience, according to an empiricist, is the only thing, is what we base most of our judgments on. Right? And we tend to attribute to our experience more value than it maybe deserves, particularly in its sort of predictive function. Now, along come a few Germans at the end of the 18th century who say that, well, actually, we can pool our senses together to form concepts that we don't have any direct sense of, right? For example, do we have any sense for dealing with space? Right? How do we navigate spatial relations? How do we move around a room? Right? We see it, we smell it, we hear it. Right? We have to pool our sensory information. We have to pool a lot of sensory information together in order to navigate space. What about time? Do we have any direct sense that tells us what time it is? Yeah, we observe through our senses the passage of time. And so Romanticism is drawing on this successor movement called transcendentalism, which is about observing your environment, pooling your senses together, and forming some sort of new impression out of that, right? So one of the poets you read for today, a guy by the name of Samuel Taylor Coleridge, wrote a very, very long book at the beginning of the 19th century, which lays out his basic theory of poetry. Right? Essentially, he says the human imagination has two separate faculties. The first he calls fancy, which in his era just meant more or less the same thing as fantasy. Right? And this is the lesser function of imagination. All the fancy does is take in sense impressions and reorganize them into new patterns. It doesn't create anything new or different. This is what he argues most of the neoclassical poets did, right? They just took already existing material, put it into different patterns, and that was it. The superior faculty he simply refers to as imagination, and you can tell it's important because he often capitalizes it. And what the imagination does is take in sense impressions, melt them down in order to form something new, something different. Right? Much like a transcendentalist would argue, you use your senses to experience things that we have no direct sense for, right? Okay, everybody still with me? Everybody following? Okay, if you get confused, please raise a hand, ask a question. All right, so what this means as far as romantic poetry is concerned is it tends to it actually does, believe it or not, tend to follow a relatively predictable pattern. Most romantic poems begin with a description of the environment in which the poem is taking place. This is one of the reasons we tend to think of Romanticism as a kind of nature art, right? As being nature poetry. Usually the poet is out, in some sort of awe-inspiring landscape. And then this environment provokes him into inner musings. Right, so he observes his environment and he starts thinking about it. And then he will try to apply the results of his inner musings to his current situation, right? So the motion we get in a romantic lyric is usually a sort of out-in, out motion. Right? I am out in nature, I'm observing a beautiful mountain or a beautiful waterfall. I take all that in. Right? My individual brain mulls over each little particle of this waterfall. And then I spit back out the results of my musings. So this is why I was suggesting earlier that the primary goal of a romantic poem is to demonstrate human thought in action, right? They're really poems about the cognitive process. Now, this is one thing that makes it very different from neoclassicism, right? Are neoclassicists all that interested in the workings of an individual mind? They're primarily interested in people as social animals, right? People in relation to other people. They're not that interested in a single person's inner subjectivity. So that's really kind of the big innovation that we get with Romanticism. The other thing that the Romantics are particularly interested in is deformalizing the level of language in poetry. right? We noted that the neoclassicists were very, very formal, right? You're supposed to write in the same meter, the same rhyme scheme, just about every poem. And there are a lot of these and thous and doths in neoclassical verse. A romantic poet, on the other hand, prefers generally informal language and relatively flexible poetic forms. So all of the poems that you read for today do have fairly regular rhyme schemes, but the meters are a bit varied, and the level of language is a little bit less obscure than the neoclassical poets, right? In addition to which, most of those classical allusions are not, they're not, they throw away all those allusions to Greek and Roman mythology, right? We didn't really see a lot of those in these poems. Okay, so let's go to the Wordsworth poem. Which is one of the,
459.
thank you, most typical lyrics of its type. What did you think of this? What did you get out of this one? I wandered lonely as a cloud. He is comparing himself to a cloud, yeah.
Well, I found it kind of weird because
Uh-huh.
clouds aren't really alone. Like there's groups of them.
Okay, yeah. We do tend to see clouds actually in clusters, right? And when we see them really cluster, then it's time to get inside. But yeah, so he is, a lone cloud. And what's the basic situation of this lone cloud to which he compares himself?
It's floating above everything.
Okay, it's floating above. What specifically? Pardon?
Hills and meadows.
Hills and meadows. And what's all over the hills and meadows? Yes, this host of golden daffodils, right? So the important relationship here is between the lone floating cloud and the fields of yellow daffodils. Right, I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high o'er vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils, beside the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze. So there's an immediate contrast here, right? We have the poet wandering lonely as a cloud. And are the daffodils lonely? No, exactly, yeah. So we've got lone, cloud, versus daffodil crowd, right? Cloud and crowd are rhymed with each other to emphasize the poet's separation from the daffodils, right? Continuous as the stars that shine and twinkle on the Milky Way, they stretched in never-ending line along the margin of a bay. 10,000 saw I at a glance, tossing their heads in sprightly dance. The waves beside them danced, but they outdid the sparkling waves in glee. A poet could not but be gay in such a jocund company. I gazed and gazed, but little thought what wealth the show to me had brought. So his status is status solely of observer, right? Right, as the daffodils do their dance and enjoy being, in company with each other, the only emotional response he has, right, comes from watching, just from observing. He doesn't participate. For oft when on my couch I lie, in vacant or in pensive mood, they flash upon that inward eye which is the bliss of solitude. And then my heart with pleasure fills and dances with the daffodils. So let's see if we can trace that kind of motion I described as being characteristic of a romantic poem in this lyric, right? Where do we have the first stage happening?
First stanza.
Okay, yep, first stanza, description of environment. And does it end there?
No.
Yeah, actually, the first three stanzas are pretty much a description of his environment, right? The first three stanzas, he's just telling you what he's observing. Where does he get to stage 2, to the inner musings?
I think line 17.
Okay, why would you say line 17?
Because he's contemplating,
Mhm.
at this point.
Yeah.
He starts to kind of think, well, all I did was look at
Mhm.
these daffodils, but I really didn't
Okay.
think about what it had brought me as far as.
Yeah, this is the beginning of reflection here. Right? Yeah, he's starting to reflect on this particular observation. For often on my couch I lie in vacant or in pensive mood. They flash upon that inward eye which is the bliss of solitude. And then my heart with pleasure fills and dances with the daffodils. Most of the poem is taken up with description, right? And we kind of get those last two parts of the process sandwiched into this last stanza. Right? He goes back, he reflects on it, and only in reflection, right, only upon remembering the experience is he able to participate in the dance, right? When he's physically present, he can't do it. He can only do so in his memory. So what? What do we do with that? Why does it matter that when he's physically there,
He's physically there, he's in solitude, but
Mhm.
the memories of his head.
yeah, I think you're getting at something here. Right? There's a kind of body-mind distinction that's being drawn here, right? He can't bodily go and dance with the daffodils for whatever reason. He is unable physically to do so. But in his imagination, right, his synthesized memory of the experience, he is able to join in the dance. Right, so this primacy again of the imagination, right, allowing you to put together experiences you haven't had in real life. Now, the other thing we see here is a kind of direct description of the way Wordsworth believed poetry worked. Wordsworth argued that a poem was essentially intense emotion recollected in tranquility. So you go out, you experience something that gives you a serious case of the feels. You come back to your private little poet's study in your little woodland cottage, because what romantic poet doesn't have a private study in a little wood cottage, right? And then you distill that experience into a poem. That's essentially the process he's describing here. Now, this is a short and relatively slight poem. Let's look at something a little bit meatier. Let's go to the Coleridge poem, Frost at Midnight, 617. we have here a sort of clearer division of those three movements. Right? If we look, for example, at this first long verse paragraph, can I get a volunteer to read this? Page 617, Frost at Midnight. That means not it?
Those goes.
Fair enough. Can we get someone to positively volunteer rather than to negatively disvolunteer?
Just the whole poem, or just?
Just the first, like up to about line 24.
Gotcha.
So yeah, just like the first verse paragraph.
The frost performs a secret ministry.
Mm-hmm.
Unhelped by any wind, the owlet's cry came loud, and hark again, loud as before. The inmates of my cottage, all at rest, have left me to that solitude which suits abstruser's musings, save that at my side my cradled infant slumbers peacefully. 'Tis calm indeed, so calm that it disturbs and vexes meditation with its strange and extreme silentness. Sea, hill, and wood, this populous village, sea and hill and wood, with all the numberless goings on of life. Inaudible as dreams, the thin blue flame lies on my low burnt fire and quivers not. Only that film which fluttered on the grate still flutters there, the sole unquiet thing. Methinks its motion is this hush of nature, gives it dim sympathies with me who live, making it a companionable form, whose puny flaps and freaks the idling spirit by its own moods interprets everywhere, echo or mirror seeking of itself, and makes a toy of thought.
Okay, great. Thank you, Devante. Okay, so what is the situation that the speaker is laying out here at the beginning of the poem?
Late at night, he's the only one up.
Okay, late night. There are other people present, but he's the only one awake. What time of year is it? Yeah, winter. We can tell from the formation of the frost, right? What other information can we glean from the beginning of the poem about the situation, about the environment?
Off in the woods.
Okay. Yeah, he's isolated, right? What else?
This is a domestic environment, there's a baby.
Yeah, domestic environment. It's a home, right? There's a baby here. The baby's asleep.
Did you were quiet? You said
Yeah.
It disturbs him,
Uh-huh.
so quiet.
Like creepy quiet, right? Makes it hard, so quiet it makes it hard to think. What else? Then what is he focusing in on by the end of the stanza? What is his sort of meditational focus here?
The fireplace.
Yeah, there's a little object on the fireplace. Or he starts talking about this film flitting about on the fireplace.
It's kind of like ash. Is that what he's talking about? Like the ash on the grate or something like that? Or
It's not ash. No, what it is, it's like sometimes you get something that looks almost like a little paper kind of fluttering about on the grate in a fireplace. That's what the film is. That's what he's talking about. So it almost looks like a little ghost or spirit kind of fluttering around on the fireplace grate. Now, as he notes sort of in the footnote here, right, the traditional English nickname for this particular object was a stranger. And it was supposed to indicate, if you saw the stranger fluttering on the grate, it was supposed to indicate that you were about to get a visitor, right? That someone was coming to see you. All right, so this is our basic situation, right? He spends first verse paragraph laying this out. This is our environment. All right, can I get a volunteer to read from But Oh, How Oft? Forrest, go for it.
But oh, how oft at school with most believing mind, presageful have I gazed upon the bars, to watch that fluttering stranger, and as oft with unclosed lids already had I dreamt of my sweet birthplace in the old church tower, whose bells the poor man's only music rang, from morn to evening, all the hot fair day, so sweetly that they stirred and haunted me with a wild pleasure, falling on mine ear, most like articulate sounds of things to come. So gazed I, till the soothing things I dreamt lulled me to sleep, and sleep prolonged my dreams. And so I brooded all the following morn, awed by the stern preceptor's face, mine eye, fixed with mock study on my swimming book. Save if I had door half opened, and I snatched a hasty glance, and still my heart leaped up, for still I hoped to see the stranger's face, townsman or aunt or sister more beloved, my playmate when we both were clothed alike.
All right, thank you very much. So what is he retreating back into?
Childhood.
Yeah, childhood memory, right? The second verse paragraph is a memory. Right, a memory of what? What's he remembering? What's he thinking back to?
Sweet birthplace.
Yeah, he's thinking sweet. Yeah, exactly. But the sweet birthplace is clearly urban, right? It's a lot louder. It's a lot noisier. There's more stuff going on. So yeah, he's thinking back to his birthplace, childhood, and what else?
The sights and the sounds, kind of, he
Mhm.
talks about the bell tower. I think it's kind of funny. He calls it the poor man's music.
Uh-huh.
Bell tower.
Yeah, well, if you're a poor Londoner in 1801, you're not shelling out to go to the symphony, right? Probably the only music you're getting is the church bells. Where else does he reimagine? Yeah, go ahead, Capriana.
Okay, you said in the first stanza, a stranger's appears. Or
Yeah.
appear.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he said that, still I hope to see the stranger's face, like, he looking for something.
Yeah.
Wanting to see something, like, that's what he thinking.
Yeah, so he's exactly, the end of this stanza actually comes back to the end of the last stanza, right? Where he's observing this object that's nicknamed a stranger in common parlance. And that gets him thinking about someone coming to visit when he was a child. Something coming to visit, like what are the visitors interrupting in the childhood memory? I hope to see the stranger's face, townsman or aunt or sister more beloved, my playmate when we both were clothed alike. What are they interrupting? What unpleasant experience? Unpleasant experience. Yeah, what unpleasant experience are they interrupting? Unpleasant for him. Right, and so I brooded all the following morn, awed by the stern preceptor's face, mine eye fixed with mock study on my swimming book.
School.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he's remembering himself at school and how much he disliked school. Right? He's the stern teacher watching over him while he pretends to read the book, while his eye keeps glancing to the door, hoping some stranger, some new experience from outside is going to come in, right? So this is movement 2, right? This is phase 2 of our romantic lyric pattern, right? Retreat back into thought, retreat back into memory. So can I get somebody to read from Dear Babe That Sleepest Cradled?
Yeah.
Go for it, Kyle.
Dear babe that sleepest cradled by my side, whose gentle breathings, heard in this deep calm, fill up the interspersed vacancies and momentary pauses of the thought. My babe so beautiful, it thrills my heart with tender gladness thus to look at thee, and think that thou shalt learn far other lore and in far other scenes. For I was reared in the great city, pit mid cloisters dim, and saw naught lovely but the sky and stars. But thou, my babe, shalt wander like a breeze by lakes and sandy shores, beneath the crags of ancient mountain, and beneath the clouds, which image in their bulk both lakes and shores and mountain crags. So shalt thou see and hear the lovely shapes and sounds intelligible of that eternal language which thy God utters, who from eternity doth teach himself in all, and all things in himself. Great universal teacher, he shall mold thy spirit, and by giving make it ask.
All right, great. Thank you, Kyle. Okay, so what's happening then in this stanza? What part of the movement is this?
I think he's kind of. This is what I did my in-class writing on. I thought
Okay.
about. I thought he was very optimistic at this point in the poem because you know, he's saying that his child, as opposed to his upbringing in an urban environment, will have much more experiences and a much better environment with which to grow up in. And the fact that this isolated cottage because he's got all these nature experiences and things like that. So I think that's kind of what he's elaborating on in this stanza.
Yeah, his own childhood he describes sitting, pretending to read a book, waiting for something new to happen, right? Something new to come in and disrupt routine. And his son isn't going to have to worry about that, right? His son is going to have all of these wonderful, beautiful experiences out in the natural world, right? What's his son's teacher going to be? Right? Nature, experience, right? His son is going to go out and directly experience the world. Right? Thou, my babe, shalt wander like a breeze by lakes and sandy shores, beneath the crags of ancient mountain, and beneath the clouds, which image in their bulk both lakes and shores and mountain crags. So, right, mountain crags, lakes and shores, you know, these... Where was I going with this? Right. He's not talking about gentle nature either, right? He's not talking about pleasant meadows and fields, right? The Romantics generally aren't interested, you know, with the exception of Wordsworth and Spring and Daffodils, in gentle meadows and fields, right?
Like hardcore nature.
Exactly, yeah. They like big, badass nature, right? They like mountain crags. They like storm clouds, right? They like natural objects that are likely to induce extreme states of emotion. Yeah, like big waterfalls, yes. Not your little sort of gentle little creekside waterfall, but yes, exactly. Like your Niagara Falls kind of object, your Victoria Falls kind of object, right? All right, so can I get a volunteer then to read the final stanza here for us? Anybody? Why is this so hard? All right, you want to do it again, Forrest? All right.
Therefore all seasons shall be sweet to thee, whether the summer clothe the gentle earth with greenness, or the red breast sit and sing betwixt the tufts of snow on the bare branch of mossy apple tree, while the night thatch smokes in the sun thaw. Whether the eavesdrops fall, heard only in the trances of the blast, or if the secret ministry of frost shall hang them up in silent icicles, quietly shining to the quiet moon.
Okay, so what are we coming back to here at the end of the poem here? What did we start with?
Going back to nature, outside stuff.
Yeah, we got more nature, right?
But it's a different season. It was winter and now it's
Uh-huh. We go through all the seasons here. We cycle through, so we got summer clothe the general earth with greenness, the red breast sit and sing betwixt the tufts of snow and the bare branch of mossy apple tree. So we got summer, we got spring, while the night thatch smokes in the sun thaw, whether the eve drops fall heard only in the trances of the blast, or if the secret ministry of frost shall hang them up in silent icicles, quietly shining to the silent moon. So we go through summer, spring, autumn, fall here, right? Not in order, for whatever reason. But yeah, all seasons shall be sweet to thee. We cycle through all seasons. But which season do we finish with? Where do we end? Yeah, right where we started.
Circular.
Yes. Comes back around in a circle. So, what does this suggest about all of Coleridge's hopes for his son? If we just finish up where we began in the first place, with the frost. If we think about what frost is and what frost does, right? I mean, what does it mean to be frozen? What kind of qualities do we associate with frost? Cold, still, right? Yeah. Stagnant.
So you just want to stay there his whole life? Is that what he's trying to say? Or like
Well-
go experience the world, stay here.
Yeah, I mean, who's looking at the frost on the window at the beginning of the poem?
Coleridge.
Coleridge, the speaker of the poem, right? Yeah, he's observing the frost forming on the window, and he's coming back to that image at the end of the poem, this image of sort of frozen stillness. So he wants his son to have a very different sort of life, a very different sort of upbringing than he had, right? But at the end of the poem, as we run through all the seasons, we end up just coming back to the frost.
Always come back.
It's kind of like a sense of inevitability.
Yeah,
History repeats.
exactly. Yeah, whatever his hopes for the boy might be, it's going to come back to that frost on the window, right? It's going to, however different he might want his son's life to be, it's not going to happen.
It's like, kind of like he's saying, like, I have great intention for you, but your life's still going to suck, basically.
Well, to be fair, Coleridge's life only sucked because he was married to a woman he completely disdained and was addicted to opium. But
Awesome.
yeah, so some of the suckery in Coleridge's life was of his own making. But yeah, I think what's being suggested here is that desire is one thing. These musings are great for a kind of nighttime. I can't get to sleep session, right? Yeah, they're great. Exactly. He's coming back to reality. It's no, my son's life is probably going to follow more or less the same trajectory as mine. Cheerful, huh?
A realist.
That's right. Hey, no. Nobody said poetry was supposed to make you feel good. All right, so we are about out of time, so we'll leave it there. Make sure you turn in your in-class writings as you go. I will have your I'll have your summaries to give back to you on Thursday, and I will also have your previous homework assignment probably graded by sometime tonight.